All right, let's talk about Elizabeth I. This is where it all kicks off. From this moment, Britain starts to become a major player in Europe, you get me? They keep grabbing more and more territory, and then, boom, the Industrial Revolution. So get this, the Industrial Revolution happens after their golden age. It's like they had two massive breaks. Boom, boom! And the Queen, during that second boom, that was Queen Victoria, of course. But then, the balance of power starts to crumble. And that's when you start to hear the footsteps of the world wars creeping in.
Okay, from here on out, things get so British. Seriously. You have this beef between the feudal lords, and you have this massive rivalry between the powerful lords of England and France. All of that chaos, that was the 100 Years' War. It became a total bloody mess, where the King of France and the King of England were basically trying to be the same guy. It was a complete disaster. It was just this endless cycle of to be king, not to be king, to take over, not to take over. I'll do it. No, I'll do it. To kill, not to kill. For 100 years. Sometimes they call it the Anglo-French War, but it wasn't really a clean war between two countries. It was more like a massive, messy brawl between the most powerful nobles and lords. And then you have the Wars of the Roses. That's what happens after the 100 Years' War is over, and they're like, okay, thanks, France, we're done here. It was another insane, bloody conflict, this time between the nobles of the White Rose, the House of York, and the Red Rose, the House of Lancaster. And what happened because of all this? The feudal lords got weaker, which paved the way for the absolute monarchy. See how that works? So if I had to give you the extreme version of the flow, it's this. Invasion, invasion, invasion. They survived. Feudalism starts, then a messy, muddy fight, and then, bam, absolute monarchy arrives. That's the flow. If you just remember the flow, you're good. You don't have to remember a single name, I promise. Just get the flow. But around this time, you also had the plague, the Black Death. Man, it was supposedly insane. We're talking like half the entire country's population just whoosh, gone. A completely terrifying situation. And guess who was around during this time? Newton. Right? You're thinking, here, now, yes, Isaac Newton was English. The story goes he was basically fleeing the cities to escape the plague. During his research, an apple falls on his head, and bam, discovery. So think about it. Lady Godiva right here, Macbeth right here, and Newton right here. It all happens in this little area. Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting. We enter the absolute monarchy. The king wants all the power, and when that happens, something uniquely British occurs. See, England had adopted Christianity super early because of the Roman Empire's influence. Remember how the Romans made Christianity their state religion? They tried to crush it at first, but then they were like, okay, we can't stop this, and just made it official. Well, the Pope spread that all the way to Britain, and it exploded. Christianity spread with incredible speed. So Catholicism was huge. But then you have the moment it splits, right? The Protestant Reformation. You know the story. The Catholic Church was selling indulgences, basically saying, buy this piece of paper and you'll go to heaven. It was a bit of a money-making scheme. Martin Luther saw this and was like, that's not how it works. You don't need to buy anything. He protested, and his followers became the Protestants. And then there was another guy, John Calvin, who also broke away, but for a different reason. He came up with predestination, the idea that it's already decided who goes to heaven, so you don't need to buy anything or suck up to the church. Instead, you should just work hard and be a good person, because God has already made his choice.
So you have these major religious shifts happening. But the Reformation in England, their break from Catholicism, happened for a completely different and, frankly, hilarious reason. It had nothing to do with Luther or Calvin. This is where the Church of England is born. And the Church of England is still the main church in Britain today. So what the heck was it? You have to understand this. It's super important. It's different from the rest of Europe. They were Catholic, but then King Henry VIII, wanted a divorce. He wanted to divorce his wife, but there's a catch. In Catholicism, you can't get a divorce. So what does he do? He says, fine, I quit. And he starts his own thing. That's the Church of England. But it's not just that he was tired of his wife. There was a huge issue with the line of succession. He and his wife couldn't have a son. He was panicking, thinking, what do I do? What do I do? And ended up trying to have a child with his wife's lady-in-waiting. His plan was to go to the Pope and get his first marriage annulled, basically to have the Pope declare that the marriage was never valid in the first place. This was a loophole nobles used back then. They'd been married for over a decade, but he wanted to hit the reset button. He thought the Pope would be cool with it since Henry had defended Catholicism against Luther. He was like, the Pope owes a new one, he'll do it. But there was a massive problem. The Pope had basically been taken hostage by the Holy Roman Emperor, who just so happened to be the nephew of Henry VIII's wife. Are you following this? It's complicated. But if you think this is complicated, you can't talk about British history. This is the easy part, I'm telling you. There are times in their history that are pure hell to understand. The family trees are insane. Anyway, the Queen's nephew, the Emperor, is not going to let the Pope disgrace his aunt. So the Pope tells Henry, sorry, no can do, request denied. Henry is furious. What? You won't annul my marriage? I need an heir. So he says, fine, I'll make my own church where the king is the boss, not the Pope. And that's exactly what he did. He invented a whole new branch of Christianity just to get a divorce and secure his lineage. So England creates this unique version of Christianity where the monarch is at the very top. It was a total invention. This is why it's so different from Catholicism and Protestantism in the rest of Europe. The Church of England is basically Catholicism, but with the king in charge. This meant that the Church of England was now in conflict with the remaining Catholics in the country and with the new Protestants, the Puritans. It created a three-way religious mess. The drama that followed was insane. You'd get a Catholic queen on the throne, like Mary I, who executed so many Protestants that she became known as Bloody Mary. Yes, that Bloody Mary. Then you'd get a Protestant king, and the whole thing would flip. It was a vicious, bloody cycle. And after all that chaos, who finally takes the throne and stabilizes things? Elizabeth I. Before her, kings and queens were changing constantly. It was a revolving door. But Elizabeth reigned for a long, long time. That's why it's called the Golden Age. When you think of a queen, you think of Elizabeth. Elizabeth I, the Queen of Queens. This is the era when Britain really flexes its muscles on the world stage. They defeat the Spanish Armada. They create the East India Company and sail everywhere. And it's also the time of the English Renaissance. When you have peace, culture flourishes. Think about the Edo period in Japan. All that cool cultural stuff like kabuki and ukiyo-e happened because there was peace. You can't enjoy a play when you're worried about getting shot, right? Well, the great plays of this era in England, that was Shakespeare. So you have the peak of the absolute monarchy under Elizabeth I and the beginning of the Age of Discovery. Fast forwarding a bit, Britain becomes a powerhouse through its parliament, and then the Industrial Revolution. This is it. Thank you, Britain. From here on, it's just winning. But here's the thing. The era of the Great British Empire, thanks to the Revolution, didn't last as long as you think. Because an industrial revolution is a tech revolution. Pretty soon, other countries like Germany and France copied the technology and caught up. That initial lead starts to shrink. It's like when the first smartphone comes out and it's amazing, but then a year later, everyone else figures out how to make one too. You can't stay on top for 100 years like that. So, the Industrial Revolution gives them this massive boost, creating the Great British Empire. They had lost America, but that didn't stop them. They wouldn't got Australia and New Zealand after that. They just kept expanding. And then another boom! That second peak was under Queen Victoria. So the reason Elizabeth I and Victoria are so iconic and have this glittering image is because they were the leaders during Britain's two biggest level-up moments. In contrast, you don't really remember the names of the kings as much, do you? During Victoria's reign, they held the first World's Fair. Why? To show off. They wanted the whole world to tremble and see this is Britain's cutting-edge technology. This is how powerful we are. They were so dominant that they had a policy called glorious isolation. They didn't need to make alliances with anyone. They were number one and could do whatever they wanted. It was an era of Pax Britannica, peace by Britain. But when that balance crumbles, the world wars begin. The era of Britain being the undisputed solo champ was over, so they had to form the Triple Entente with France and Russia. It wasn't a sign of strength, it was a sign that they couldn't go it alone anymore. Their new rival was Germany. So you have this massive clash, and after World War I, Britain's power is seriously diminished. They're in massive debt to America. That's when America truly becomes the dominant power. The world saw the decline of Britain. John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist, was there. He warned them. The reparations you are forcing on Germany are too harsh. This could lead to something terrible. And he was right, but they didn't listen because they had to pay back America. By crushing Germany, they inadvertently created the conditions for the rise of the Nazis.
And then comes World War II. It was a disaster. The person who is credited with saving them from that absolute catastrophe is Winston Churchill. In Britain, Churchill's popularity is off the charts. Elizabeth and Victoria represent the glorious peaks, but Churchill represents salvation from the absolute brink of destruction. But even then, you can see the shift. Near the end of the war, Roosevelt, USA, and Stalin, Soviet Union, were already making plans for the post-war world without him. They knew it was going to be an America versus Russia world. Britain, even as a victor, had been sidelined. After the war, the Cold War starts. The dollar becomes the world's reserve currency, not the pound, and Britain's colonies all start declaring independence. India, Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand, poof, 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 they're all gone. They didn't have the money or the global support to hold on to them anymore. It's actually kind of funny. The Beatles were so successful at bringing foreign money into Britain during this period that the government literally gave them medals for services to export. The country was that desperate. And that brings us to the EU and Brexit. The EU was formed to create a united European front against the new superpowers, America and Russia. But for Britain, with its history of glorious isolation and its own internal squabbles, it just never fully fit. You see news today about Scotland wanting independence or issues in Northern Ireland, and you might think, why now? It's 2025. But it's not now. They've been fighting about this stuff forever. They don't see themselves as one single British people. They are English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish. And that long, complicated, messy history is why they joined the EU. And it's also why they left. That is Brexit. When one great power reigns, there is a kind of peace. When that power fades, chaos often follows. The Roman peace, the British peace. Now we're seeing the American peace with America First policies start to show cracks. Where in this cycle are we now? It's a little scary, isn't it, when a single nation's power begins to fade and others start vying for the top spot. If you understand this history, you can see what might happen next. See you next time.